Mist sits low over a wall of granite that rises straight out of Blackwater. No foothills, no gradual slope, just stone going vertical from sea level to nearly 1,000 meters in a single breath. Red cabins cluster at the edge of a fjord, so still it holds a second, upside-down version of the mountains above it. Wooden racks stand empty along the shoreline, waiting for a season that has not yet arrived. Somewhere out past the harbor, a fishing boat engine idles, patient, unhurried, part of a rhythm older than the villages themselves. This is Lofoten. To the rest of the world, it is a name attached to a photograph. The view from above rain, red rorbu, scattered like scattered coals against blue water, mountains that look drawn rather than eroded. It has been called one of the most beautiful places on Earth so many times that the phrase has started to lose its edges. People arrive with a shot list already built from someone else's feed, hoping to stand in the exact place a stranger once stood. But behind that beauty is a life that is anything but simple. The same granite that photographs so well also blocks the sun for months. The same fjords that look like paintings also decide, some winters, whether a boat goes out or stays tied to the dock. The same silence that visitors come chasing is for the people who live here, something closer to isolation, weighed daily against everything the islands also give them. It is a place where the postcard and the reality occupy the exact same coordinates and yet describe almost entirely different lives. So, the question worth asking isn't whether Lofoten is beautiful. Everyone with a phone camera already knows that. The question is what it costs to actually live inside that beauty year after year, long after the visitors have gone home with their photographs, and what it takes to keep choosing a place this demanding when almost anywhere else would ask so much less of you. The Wall, life against the Lofoten. Lofoten sits well above the Arctic Circle, a chain of islands strung off the coast of northern Norway, between roughly the 68th and 69th parallels, closer to the North Pole than to Oslo. Seen from the mainland near Bodø or from far out at sea, the archipelago appears as a single unbroken silhouette, 100 kilometers of jagged peaks standing shoulder to shoulder. Norwegians have a name for this profile, the Lofoten, the Lofoten Wall. It is not a metaphor invented for tourism brochures. It is simply what the islands look like to anyone approaching from the water, and it has shaped how outsiders have understood this place for centuries. The archipelago is really 4 main islands linked by bridges and tunnels along a single road, the E10, which threads roughly 170 kilometers from Austvogoya in the northeast through Vestvågøya and Flakkstadøya to Moskenesøya in the southwest, where the road simply stops at the village of Å. Beyond that, 2 further islands, Værøy and Røst, sit isolated enough that they are reachable only by ferry, separated from the rest of the chain by open ocean. Along this single road live the places most visitors will recognize by name, even if they couldn't place them on a map. Svolvær, the largest town and the closest thing Lofoten has to a capital. Henningsvær, spread across a scatter of islets connected by narrow bridges. Nusfjord and Reyna, both counted among the archipelago's most photographed harbors. And Uo, whose one-letter name marks the literal end of the highway. For an outsider, this geography looks like scenery, a dramatic backdrop for road trips and drone footage. For the people who live here, it is closer to a set of daily instructions. Weather here does not simply happen. It arrives, changes its mind, and arrives again, sometimes within the same hour. The Gulf Stream keeps winter temperatures milder than the latitude would suggest, which is its own kind of trick, because mild does not mean gentle. Storms roll in off the open Norwegian Sea with little warning, winds strong enough to close roads and cancel ferries, rain that turns to snow and back to rain within a single afternoon. In deep winter, the sun barely clears the mountains, and in the darkest weeks, it does not clear them at all. In summer, it never sets. Neither extreme is simply weather to be admired. Both are conditions that determine whether the boats go out, whether the school bus runs, whether a family can reach the only hospital on the islands based in Leknes. People here live with the wall. They plan around the wall. They measure the day by what the wall allows. Distances that look trivial on a map, a few dozen kilometers between one village and the next, can take far longer than expected once you factor in narrow roads, single-lane bridges, and the near certainty of stopping the car at least once just to let the view finish happening. The E10 itself only became a continuous, ferry-free route connecting Lofoten to the mainland in the final weeks of 2007. Before that, reaching these islands by road meant timing your journey around a boat schedule, not just a driving one. Even now, villages like Henningsvær sit at the end of a side road built specifically to reach them, a reminder that convenience here has always been added onto the landscape, never assumed by it. It looks, from a passing car, like the most dramatic scenery in Norway. It is actually a boundary that decides quietly and constantly the shape of everyday life for the roughly 24,000 people who call these islands home. So how do you build a community, generation after generation, on ground this narrow and weather this unpredictable? The answer starts not with the mountains, but with what has always swum beneath them. The catch, what the Skray built. Long before Lofoten was a destination, it was a workplace. For more than 1,000 years, the islands have sat at the center of one of the richest seasonal cod fisheries on Earth, and that single fact explains almost everything else about how this place came to exist. Each winter, mature Atlantic cod, known here as Skray, migrate south from the Barents Sea to spawn in the relatively sheltered, nutrient-rich waters of Vestfjorden, the body of water running along the eastern side of the archipelago. For centuries, fishermen from across northern Norway followed them, arriving each winter in numbers that briefly multiplied the population of these small islands many times over. The tools built to house and feed that seasonal workforce are still visible everywhere. The rorbu, those red and white cabins now marketed to tourists as scenic accommodation, were originally simple fishermen's huts built directly on the water so crews could step from bed to boat in minutes during the short winter fishing window. The wooden A-frame racks, called hjell, that visitors photograph draped with drying fish, are not decoration. They are functioning infrastructure, part of a preservation method that predates refrigeration by centuries. According to museum archives at the Norwegian Fishing Village Museum in O, stockfish, cod split, and air-dried on these racks through the cold, dry winter air became one of Norway's earliest and most durable export goods, light enough to ship long distances and stable enough to last for years. That trade did not stay local. Stockfish from Lofoten was carried south to Bergen, for centuries the hub of northern Norway's trade with Europe, particularly during the era when the Hanseatic League controlled much of that commerce. From there, it traveled further still. Today, a significant share of Lofoten's dried and salted cod is still exported to southern Europe, especially Italy and Spain, where it appears on menus as bacala or bacalao, dishes with no obvious connection, at first glance, to a handful of Arctic islands. Archaeological evidence suggests the roots of settlement here run even deeper than the fishery itself. Researchers have traced human presence in Lofoten back thousands of years, with a Viking Age power center once standing near what is now the village of Kabelvåg, a site now preserved and reconstructed at the Lofoten Viking Museum on Vestvågøya. The fishery also built something less visible than architecture, a civic identity. Villages like Ballstad, Stamsund, and Kabelvåg were not planned settlements in the modern sense. They grew, harbor by harbor, wherever a sheltered inlet let boats land safely near the fishing grounds of Vestfjorden. Ownership of a boat, a share in a crew, a place on a drying rack, these were the currencies of status here for generations, long before anyone thought to measure the island's worth in hotel beds or guest nights. Church records and heritage archives across the archipelago still trace family names back through generations of the same harbors, a continuity that is unusual for communities this exposed to the sea's willingness to take as much as it gives. To a visitor, the racks in the red cabins look quaint, a photogenic detail to frame against the mountains. They are actually the physical residue of an economy that has decided, more than almost anything else, who lives here and how. The fishing did not simply provide income, it built the villages, dictated their placement along sheltered harbors, and set a working calendar that many households still follow, even as the industry around them has changed. Every red cabin rented out to tourists today was, within living memory, housing built for a fisherman who might drown chasing the same fish that now feeds the region's restaurants. What does it mean, then, when the very structures built for survival become the backdrop for someone else's vacation photo? That tension doesn't stay in the past. It shapes what an ordinary day here looks like right now. The season, a day shaped by weather and work. There is no single ordinary day in Lofoten because the islands run on two overlapping calendars, the season and the weather within it. In January and February, when the skrei arrive to spawn, harbors like Svolvær, Ballstad, and Stamsund fill with fishing boats again, much as they have for centuries, part of what is still known locally as Lofotfisket, the great winter fishery. Fishermen check forecasts before anything else because a boat that leaves under one sky can return under a very different one. Children walk to school in near darkness, under streetlights rather than sunlight, in villages where the entire community effectively organizes itself around a fish that most of them will never personally sell. By contrast, summer here runs almost without night. The sun stays above the horizon for weeks, and the working day stretches accordingly. This is when tourism reaches its peak, and increasingly, it is tourism, not fishing, that determines how a family earns its living. Someone who grew up gutting cod on their father's boat might now guide sea eagle safaris out of Henningsvær, or manage a rental cabin in Rena, or run a cafe in Svolvær that serves fish soup to travelers rather than selling fish directly to a buyer. In Vestvågøys Ballstad, some in the community have deliberately limited large hotel development to protect the working harbor, while other municipalities have leaned further into short-term rentals and guest capacity. Neither choice is simple, and both shape what a resident's actual workday looks like. Ordinary community life still happens around fixed points, the Coop or Kiwi supermarket in Leknes or Svolvær, the ferry schedule, the school in whichever village still has enough children to keep one open. Kindergartens and schools here are not abstractions. In smaller villages, a school closing because too few young families can find housing is treated as an emergency, not an inconvenience. Because a village without a school is a village that will not have children in it for long. Growing up here means growing up bilingual in two economies, learning that a good winter for cod and a good summer for guests are both, in their own way, good years, and that a bad one in either direction is felt by nearly everyone. Weather still edits every plan, no matter the season. A hike that looked manageable at breakfast can turn dangerous by early afternoon, and mountain rescue services here field calls each winter from travelers who underestimated how quickly a clear trail can disappear into cloud, ice, or avalanche risk. Locals build a kind of fluency around this that visitors rarely have time to learn, which peaks to avoid after rain, which harbor roads flood first, which ferry route to trust when the forecast turns. It is a form of literacy, read off the sky and the water rather than a page, passed down the same way boat handling once was. From outside, a day in Lofoten looks like postcard living, waking up to fjord views, working somewhere scenic, going home to silence and stars. It is actually a constant negotiation between two industries pulling in different directions, one rooted in the sea's unpredictable generosity, the other in visitors' unpredictable enthusiasm. Both demand flexibility. Both can vanish, briefly or permanently, depending on forces well beyond any one household's control. What happens, though, when the industry that was supposed to save this place after fishing declined, starts to outgrow the place itself? The crowd. When 24,000 meet a million. Lofoten's population is small, somewhere around 24 to 25,000 people spread across the whole archipelago. Regional tourism figures for recent years put annual visitor numbers well over 1 million, with northern Norway as a whole reporting more than 2 million overnight stays in the summer of 2025 alone, and Lofoten among the strongest growing destinations in that count. On a single busy day at Reinebringen, the stone-stepped trail above Rhein, visitor traffic has reportedly climbed into the hundreds of thousands across a season, a number that would be unremarkable in a major city and is almost unmanageable on a narrow mountain path serving a village of a few hundred residents. One well-known trail above Rhein, rebuilt in recent years with nearly 2,000 hand-set stone steps, was designed in part to make a previously dangerous informal route safer for the sheer number of people now determined to climb it. That single project, equal parts infrastructure and concession, says something about where the islands find themselves, managing demand that arrived faster than the roads, trails, or housing stock were ever built to absorb. The benefits of that attention are real, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. Tourism has replaced income that the fishing industry, consolidated and mechanized over recent decades, no longer provides to nearly as many households. It has kept some villages populated that might otherwise have emptied out entirely, the way so many small coastal communities across northern Norway already have. It funds restaurants, galleries, and guiding businesses that give young people a reason to build a life here instead of moving to Bodø or Tromsø or Oslo. Locals in Henningsvær point, not without some pride, to how the village reinvented itself as a cultural and creative destination without losing its working harbor entirely. Fishing boats and art galleries sharing the same small islands. But the costs are equally real, and increasingly, they are the subject of open local debate rather than something residents quietly absorb. Housing has become the sharpest edge of the tension. As cabins and apartments are converted into short-term rentals for visitors, year-round housing for local workers, especially the seasonal staff that restaurants, shops, and boat tours depend on, has grown scarcer and more expensive. Some villages effectively empty out in the off-season, driveways unplowed for days at homes now used only a few weeks a year, while summer sees those same streets overwhelmed. Municipal governments, funded largely according to resident population rather than visitor numbers, are left responsible for roads, parking, waste systems, and toilets sized for a fraction of the people actually using them. One nearby municipality, Vågen, home to under 10,000 residents, has faced budget pressure severe enough to force service closures even while hosting some of the archipelago's highest tourist numbers. In 2026, Norway moved to allow municipalities to add a visitor levy on overnight stays, an attempted cost recovery that Lofoten's local leaders had pushed for directly. There is also a quieter cost, harder to put a number on. The sense among some who fish for a living that they now compete for physical space with an industry that did not exist in its current form a generation ago. Space for drying racks, space to launch a boat, space, simply, to live somewhere near the harbor their family has worked for decades. Local tourism officials have pushed for years for tools to manage that pressure directly, arguing that a landscape this fragile cannot simply absorb ever larger numbers without support, while national policy has been slower to catch up with what small coastal municipalities are actually experiencing on the ground. Norway's move to permit a modest visitor levy on overnight stays starting in the summer of 2026 was, by most accounts here, less a solution than a first overdue acknowledgement of a problem that had been visible for years. From a visitor's phone screen, Lofoten looks like an open invitation, a place built for the taking of photographs. It is actually a working landscape now hosting far more guests than residents, where every rented cabin, every parked car, every crowded trailhead represents a small transfer of space and cost from the people who live here to the people passing through, whose Lofoten gets told in the photographs, and whose Lofoten has to clean up, house its workers, and keep the school open after everyone else has gone home. Why people stay. None of this is a simple story, and the people who live in Lofoten rarely tell it as one. Ask why someone stays through a winter with barely 6 hours of weak daylight, through housing pressure and rising costs, through an economy split awkwardly between a fish that has sustained their families for 1,000 years and visitors who arrived in real numbers only within the last decade or two. And the answers rarely mention scenery at all. They mention family. They mention a harbor their grandfather worked, a school their children attend, a silence they cannot find anywhere else, a community small enough that everyone still recognizes the boats coming in. The islands demand something from the people who live here that they do not demand from anyone passing through. They ask for patience with weather that refuses to cooperate. They ask for tolerance of isolation, real isolation, not the curated kind sold in travel articles. They ask people to build an identity around two industries, fishing and tourism, that occasionally serve each other and occasionally compete for the same narrow strip of land between mountain and sea. Some meet those demands by leaving, trading the wall for an easier horizon in Bodø or Tromsø or further south. Others meet them by staying anyway, not out of stubbornness alone, but because the alternative, a life without this particular light, this particular silence, this particular harbor, has never felt like an equal trade. And in return, the islands offer something visitors glimpse for a weekend and locals inherit for a lifetime. A place where the wall of granite that looks from outside like a barrier to be admired from a car window is, from inside, simply the shape of home. To the world, Lofoten will likely remain what it has become, a name attached to a photograph, a bucket list backdrop, one of the most beautiful places anyone has ever seen through a screen. To the people living inside that photograph, it is something less picturesque and more permanent. Work, weather, family, and a stubborn refusal to let a place this hard also become a place emptied of the people who made it worth photographing in the first place. Perhaps that is the real measure of a home, not that it is easy, or even that it is beautiful, but that people keep choosing it anyway, long after the season and the light and the visitors have all moved on. If places like this, shaped as much by the people who stay as by the landscapes that draw everyone else in, are the kind of story you want more of, there are other islands, other coastlines, other communities living quietly behind their own postcards. Consider staying close for the next one.